Today we're going to do prayer, the motion of a hidden fire, which is going to be covered by Genesis chapter 39 to 41, as well as Genesis chapter 45, verses 5 to 8, and Genesis chapter 50, verse 20 and 24. We're continuing with day 13 along our 650 Bible prayers learning. So let's begin. So in 39, we go through Joseph in Potiphar's house. So as you remember, many scholars believe like Joseph's story was a foreshadowing of Jesus. So Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, sold as a slave to traveling merchants for 20 pieces of silver and taken to Egypt. But yet God had a bigger plan. So that's what we're going to go into in chapter 39. So in verse 1 of 39, now Joseph had been taken to Egypt. An Egyptian named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guards, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man serving in the household of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with Joseph and that the Lord made everything he did successful, Joseph found favor with his master and became his personal attendant. Potiphar also put him in charge of his household and placed all that he owned under his authority. From the time that he put him in charge of his household and of all that he had owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian house because of Joseph. The Lord's blessing was on all that he owned in his house and in his fields. He left all that he owned under Joseph's authority. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Here we can see that when God is with you, just like he was with Joseph, when God is with you, absolutely everything you do is successful. You have favor with others. Others are therefore blessed by just your very presence, your essence, just by being around you. Because of their association with you, they get these blessings. And all that you have authority over is blessed. So anything under your authority that is in your hands that you are trusted with, just like we saw previously when we went through seeing Haman hung on the very gallows that he had intended for Mordecai, and the King Ahasuerus had then taken the signet ring that was on the hand of Mordecai and given it to, the hand of Haman and given it to Mordecai. You see that your authority holds weight. The signet ring was an example of that authority. Your authority holds weight. So your everything that is under your authority is blessed when you walk with God. And also when you're not under, severe spiritual warfare that makes you blind to it. But anyway, now we continue. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. After some time, his master's wife looked longingly at Joseph and said, "Sleep with me." But he refused. "Look," he said to his master's wife, "with me here my master does not concern himself with anything in his house, and he has put all that he owns under my authority." So again, authority. Everything is under his authority, under his own hands. Verse 9, no one in his house is greater than I am. Potiphar has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. So how could I do this immense evil, and how could I sin against God? Although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her. Now, one day he went into the house to do his work, and none of the household servants were there. She grabbed him by his garment and said, "Sleep with me." But leaving his garment in her hand, he escaped and ran outside. When she saw that he had left his garment with her and had run outside, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "my husband brought a Hebrew man," the Hebrew being Joseph, "to make fools of us. He came to me so he could sleep with me, and I screamed as loud as I could. When he heard me screaming for help, he left his garment beside me and ran outside." She put Joseph's garment beside her until his master came home. Then she told him the same story. "The Hebrew slave you brought to us came to make a fool of me. But when I screamed for help, he left his garment beside me and ran outside." When his master heard the story, his wife told him, Things are These are the things your slave did to me. He was furious, and he had him thrown into prison with the king's prisoners, where the king's prisoners were confined. So Joseph was there in prison. In real life, this does play out in everyday situations where people have a desire and of you and see and know your calling and see your light, see your star, see your destiny, and they do anything to trap you. And when you don't fall into their trap, they tell lies or create situations in order to try and mess with your reputation, like in this case with Potiphar's wife. And in some cases, you are entrapped by it, but in the end, God does release you from such situations and lets you go free. Okay, so we go back to Joseph being in prison, but the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. He granted him favor with the prison warden. See, favor is still always on your life, regardless of the situations that man may create. Anyway, verse 22, the warden put all the prisoners who were in the prison under Joseph's authority, and he was responsible for everything that was done there. The warden did not bother with him under Joseph's authority because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything he did successful. Here you see that it's clear that Joseph's authority and everything under his authority, your calling, your light, your gifts, they're all still there despite the torment, despite the oppression that man may try to put. We do live in an evil world, but regardless, just run from any temptation, just as Joseph had run from Potiphar's wife, and he knew to run from her and to resist the temptation, regardless of the fact of the wife lusting after him. You know, it's clear that it was the way God worked through Joseph that made him so effective in his authority. You know, when you think about from way back at the beginnings of time, when you hear given the story of Adam and Eve and realizing that the one thing withheld from them, they still chose to sin against God in order to partake in it. Where in this situation with Joseph, there was just the one thing held from him, and he didn't want to hurt his master or betray the trust of the master or sin against God. So even though it was withheld from him, he ran away from the temptation rather than partaking in it. So he made a choice that Adam himself did not make or allowed Eve to take him off course. It's just interesting because if you go back to Adam and Eve, God spoke directly to Adam, telling him not to partake of the tree of good and evil. And then Adam was to relay that to Eve, but did not. So anyway, here in this situation, Joseph made the right choice. And he knew exactly how to deal with the temptation that was put toward him. He chose to resist it. Joseph assessed and used his discernment to realize that obviously nothing but problems were going to come from contact with his boss's wife. And in accordance, once the problem reached a boiling point, he ran away and resisted the temptation. Joseph did exactly what Jesus later prayed about in Matthew chapter 6, back when Jesus was saying that, and do not bring us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Joseph avoided temptation and was given the moral fortitude to be delivered from evil. So now going to Genesis 40. So in this chapter, Joseph interprets two prisoners' dreams, but essentially just remember Joseph was thrown into prison after being accused by by Potiphar's wife of trying to rape her. So obviously she was lying because it wasn't true. And unfortunately, Joseph had this very unique gift of interpreting dreams that later helps him. Verse 1 of Genesis 40. After this, the king of Egypt's cupbearer and baker offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guards, in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guards assigned Joseph to them as their personal attendant, and they were in custody for some time. The king of Egypt's cupbearer and baker, who were confined in the prison each had a dream. Both had a dream of the same on the same night, and each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they looked distraught. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We had dreams," they said to him, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." Now this is very key here where he says, don't interpretations belong to God. If you have a dream, and I know this is quite common where people look to dream books or look to other people for explanation of their dream. That is not how you're supposed to do it. If you have a dream, you must go and pray that the Holy Spirit reveals to you what that dream is. In fact, the only time somebody should be interpreting your dream for you is if you're brand new to Christ. Like maybe you're coming from the Muslim faith, or you're coming from Buddhist faith, or any other faith that doesn't worship the true and living God, Yahweh. It doesn't worship Yeshua HaMashiach. Anyone that is interpreting a dream should in fact be, that dream should be interpreted by the Holy Spirit. So if you have a dream, you go to bed, you have a dream, it doesn't make any sense to you, you continually ask and pray that God gives you a revelation of what the dream is and make sense of it. And he would clearly tell you what that dream is and what the meaning is and what he's trying to tell you if you are unable to determine what that is. Going to other people is dangerous for you spiritually, can be quite dangerous unless you truly trust them. Anyway, continue on verse 9. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph. "In my dream, there was a vine in front of me." And mind you, this is a positive dream that he's giving. So on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms came out and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. "This is its interpretation," Joseph said to him. "The 3 branches are 3 days. In just 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. You will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand the way you used to when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well for you, remember that I was with you. Please show kindness to me by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. For I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing that they should put me in the dungeon." Now we go to verse 16, where Joseph is interpreting the dream for the chief baker. This is a negative dream. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was positive, he said to Joseph, "I also had a dream. 3 baskets of white bread were on my head. In the top basket were all sorts of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." "This is its interpretation," Joseph replied. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. In just 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from off you and hang you on a tree. Then the birds will eat the flesh from your body. On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he gave a feast for all his servants. He elevated the chief cupbearer and the chief baker among his servants. Pharaoh restored the chief cupbearer to his position as cupbearer, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But Pharaoh hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had explained to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. As we can see in interpreting these dreams, Joseph had opportunity to act as God's mouthpiece, as his servant with his gift of dream interpretation, and just speak the truth of God. We also see that in addition to Joseph's political savvy and leadership and standing in his authority, that, he had the ability to interpret dreams and was smart enough to position himself with the cupbearer, who actually had easy access to Pharaoh's ears in his household and as part of his inner circle. So in today's terms, that's like Joseph networking while he was in prison. So even in prison, God was already preparing Joseph for something better. This is why it's always important for you to fully rely on God's plan and provision. You may not be able to immediately connect the steps or connect like what God is doing in your life because you don't know his end goal, but weather the storm with joy, because in the end, he'll lift you up and free you from all oppression or whatever is imprisoning you or caging you. So now in Genesis 41, Joseph had experienced a number of betrayals and hardships throughout his life. So this becomes very clear in this chapter. However, he was finally given a glimpse of God's purpose behind those hardships, specifically in this chapter when Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams for him. And remember, he is basically forgotten because he was in prison for about 2 years before the cupbearer remembered him at all. But anyway, going to verse 1 of Genesis 41. At the end of 2 years, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing beside the Nile when 7 healthy-looking, well-fed cows came up to the Nile, then came up from the Nile and began to graze about the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, sickly and thin, came up from the Nile and stood beside those cows along the bank of the Nile. The sickly, thin cows ate the healthy, well-fed cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. So he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And then this time, 7 heads of grain, plump and good, came up on one stalk. After them, 7 heads of grain, thin and scorched by the east wind. Just to be clear, the east wind, it's dry and hot. It's dry and hot, and it comes from the desert, and it withers plants and dries up all waterways. So anyway, verse 6. After them, 7 heads of grain, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up. The thin heads of grains swallowed up the 7 plump, full ones. Then Pharaoh woke up, and it was only a dream. When the morning came, he was troubled, so he summoned all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men, and Pharaoh told them his dream, but no one could interpret the dreams for him. Then the cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I remember my faults." Pharaoh was angry with his servants, and he put me and the chief baker in the custody of the captains of the guards. He and I had dreams on the same night. Each dream had its own meaning. Now a young Hebrew, a slave of the captain of the guards, was with us there. We told him our dreams. He interpreted our dreams for us, and each had its own interpretation. It turned out just the way he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was hanged. Then Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and they quickly brought him from the dungeon. He shaved, changed his clothes, and went to Pharaoh. Take note here that the change of garments and his presentation and his look, this is before Joseph's elevation. So God operates in this way. This is showing you that God operates in this way, where it says that in verse 14, and it tells you that Joseph shaved, changed his clothes, and went to Pharaoh. It's the same as God is promoting you. There's a transition. Your appearance can change, your personality, different things can change to elevate you before he changes those garments, changes your clothes, and put on a new set of clothes, your new set of garments that are cleansed and fortified. Okay, so verse 15, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I have had a dream and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said that you can hear a dream and interpret it." "I am not able to," Joseph answered Pharaoh. "It is God who will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "In my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile when 7 well-fed, healthy-looking cows came up from the Nile and grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, weak, very sickly and thin, came up. I've never seen such sickly ones as these in all the land of Egypt. Then the thin, sickly cows ate. The first 7 were well fed. When they had devoured them, you could not tell that they had devoured them. Their appearance was as bad as it had been before. Then I awoke in my dream. I also saw 7 heads of grain full and good coming up on one stalk. After them, 7 heads of grain, withered thin and scorched with the east wind, sprouted up. The thin heads of grain swallow the 7 good ones. I told this to the magicians, but no one could tell me what it means. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dream means the same thing. God has revealed to Pharaoh that what he is about to do. So here from verses 26 down to 32, Joseph's dream interpretation is given for Pharaoh. So here we go. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dream means the same thing. The 7 thin, sickly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 worthless, scorched heads of grain are 7 years of famine. It is just as I told Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt. After them, 7 years of famine will take place, and all the abundance in the land of Egypt will be forgotten. The famine will devastate the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered because of the famine that follows it. For the famine will be very severe. Since the dream was given twice to Pharaoh, it means that the matter has been determined by God, and he will carry it out soon. Then in verses 33 to 36, Joseph proposed a solution to the dream. So now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this. Let him appoint overseers over the land and take a fifth of the harvest of the land of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. Let them gather all the excess food during these good years that are coming. Under Pharaoh's authority, store the grain in the cities so they may preserve it as food. The food will be a reserve for the land during the 7 years of famine that will take place in the land of Egypt. Then the country will not be wiped out by the famine. You can very well look at this as today, if America's looked at the land of Egypt and the oncoming famine that you can see happening, and how to properly steward and protect yourselves and your family by planning ahead and having the abundance you'll need for that time in terms of food and preserving food. Then we move on to verse 37. The proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants, and he said to them, can we find anyone like this, a man who has God's spirit in him? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one as discerning and wise as you are. You will be over my house, and all my people will obey your commands. Only I, as king, will be greater than you. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, see, I am placing you over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh removed his signet ring. So again, here we go with the signet ring and placing authority on someone. Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, clothed him with fine linen garments, and placed a gold chain around his neck. He had Joseph ride in his second chariot, and servants called out before him, make way. So he placed him over all the land of Egypt. Here, this is clearly a vehicle procession to show Joseph was Pharaoh's right hand, and so that everyone can see that by Joseph riding in the second chariot. So we continue. So he placed him over all the land of Egypt, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and no one will be able to raise his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt without your permission. So Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphenath-Paneah and gave him a wife, Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. So here we move into Joseph's administration, which starts at verse 46. So Joseph was 30 years old when he had entered the service of King Pharaoh of Egypt. Joseph left Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout the land of Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced outstanding harvests. Joseph gathered all the excess food in the land of Egypt during the 7 years and put it in the cities. He put the food in every city from the fields around it. So Joseph stored up grain in such abundance like the sand of the sea. that he stopped measuring it because it was beyond measure. 2 sons were born to Joseph before the years of the famine arrived. Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore them to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh and said, God has made me forget all my hardship and my whole family. And the second son he named Ephraim and said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Then the 7 years of abundance in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in every land, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When the whole land of Egypt was stricken with famine, the people cried out to Pharaoh for food. Pharaoh told all Egypt, go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you. Now the famine had spread across the whole region, so Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Every land came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain for the famine was severe in every land. All in all, Joseph clearly lived with integrity and met people at their point of need and gave God credit. Joseph's faithfulness to God is what makes the presence of God irrefutable. So that's really why Joseph was named second in command after the king, because of his faith in God's purpose, yet the highest of all Pharaoh's advisors, allowing him to become the highest of all Pharaoh's advisors in a complete position of leadership. Can you imagine? That's such a huge destiny for someone at 17, which Joseph was around 17 years old at that time, to have been dragged out of town where he was, sold, and then bought as a servant, and to make it to this point. So essentially he being Joseph, made it from being at the bottom of the pit to the highest office in this foreign land that God had brought him to. Why, you might ask? Well, because Joseph proved himself faithful to God's purpose no matter what the circumstance. He remained faithful. You know what's funny? If you really dive into this and take, for example, in Genesis 41, verse 42, when they're talking about the signet ring, and the king placing the signet ring on Joseph, or removing the signet ring from the king's own hand and giving it to Joseph. Well, the signet ring was the king's stamp of authority. So it basically worked the same way that we might use a notary stamp today. It's just interesting that people are always after someone's authority. But here, the authority was transferred by God. Anyway, in this chapter, we see the symbols of honor were the signet ring, the change of the garments, and the new appearance, which are actually God's rewards to Joseph due to his faithfulness. In the end, Joseph's faithfulness that God rewarded, he got so much. He got the new job, his new position, his new status, his new name, his new wife. He came out on top. Here, Joseph got royal status. He got a new home. He got a new family. All these things allowed him to basically forget the painful past of what his brothers had put him through, the hardships, the rejection, being accused falsely, being a prisoner, everything. So basically God made up for lost time and his hurts. And in a time where Joseph could have easily have been bitter, Joseph brought all of his heritage into this new world that God had created for him. And he continued honoring God's promise to his people. It's funny when you break it down, you see that when a person is faithful to God's wisdom, the benefits just ripple like a pebble being thrown into water. So you could hear Pharaoh saw Joseph's character, he honored him, and believed Joseph's witness concerning God's truth. So in the end, Egypt survived and Pharaoh's kingdom multiplied. As Egypt prospered, then surrounding nations also sought help. All this came from just one faithful young man, which was Joseph, who had continued to make the best of his bad circumstances. So now we move on to Genesis chapter 45, verses 5 to 8. And now don't be grieved or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead to you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there will be 5 more years without plowing or harvesting. God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant within the land and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, Lord to his entire household, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. This is where Joseph just reveals his identity, because the time had finally come for Joseph to reveal himself to his brothers who had sold him into slavery. So while they were afraid for their lives when they came and met with Joseph, Joseph focused on the fate of his father Jacob. Now you remember that Joseph was 30 when he became second in command. So Pharaoh's given his interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams, and Joseph states that they were in the second year of famine. So 9 years had passed since Pharaoh's dream, and Joseph was 39 when he revealed himself to his brothers. So now we go to chapter 50 of Genesis, which is the last chapter of Genesis, showing that Joseph was one of the few characters in the Bible whose whole life is recorded from birth to death. His death occurred in Egypt, where embalming had become a highly developed science, and he gave his children time to take Jacob back to his homeland for burial. So in verse 20, you planned evil against me. God planned it for good, to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. This is Joseph's explanation of his ability to forgive. And here he also clarifies whose plan he followed, which was God's. So Joseph's ability to forgive was grounded in his belief that God was ultimately in charge all the time, no matter what his brothers had intended for him. And then in verse 24, Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will certainly come to your aid and bring you up from this land to the land he swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Here is very clear. God's promise never expires. So the legacy of God's promise to Abraham was so strong that even on Joseph's deathbed, after relocating his whole family to the farmlands of Goshen, he held on the promise of another place. Hundreds of years later, that same legacy began to be fulfilled in the exodus of Israel from Egypt. And even today, when you're praying, you are doing communion or anything, you still call on this legacy, the same legacy of that was sworn to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So in the end, Joseph died at 110 years old, and he saw Ephraim's sons up to the third generation. This is where they just tell you, like, things can follow you from 3-4 generations. This is just such an interesting and impactful prayer and understanding. Anyway, come back tomorrow and we'll have another session. We'll be on day 14. Enjoy your day.